Back live.
Two Hotheads.
Where Activism Happens.
With my co-host over here, Frank Capone.
That's me, and the co-host over here to my left, Mike Can.
That's right, I am on the left today.
On the left. On the left.
You're on the right, Frank. You're a righty.
On the right. I am actually a righty.
And we have a special guest.
We're switching gears.
Yeah, we just heard a song, too. What was the song? Fortunate Son?
Fortunate Son, yeah.
From Creedence Clearwater Revival?
Was it Revival?
I don't know.
Was it Mothership? Or what was the other one they had?
I don't know.
At any rate.
CCR.
Besides the point.
Yeah.
We digress.
Creedence Clearwater.
There you go.
Maybe it was
just call them Creedence, so that you just cover all of them right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you got a phone number you can call in.
Yeah, 617-206-1050. We also were talking about the Methuen Police Department arresting this kid for alleged terrorist threats that we don't really buy. And what other song? We were playing some other funny songs related to that.
Yeah. We had a song that went out to the Methuen Police Department by Bob Dylan, and the name of that song is "Talkin' John Birch Society Blues," which is a great Bob Dylan song that not many people know about.
And we're gonna play some more music like that later. We got some other ideas.
We got someone special though, right?
Yes, on the phone, waiting patiently.
Waiting very patiently while we
an
ramble
elected
on.
official.
She is
a friend of the show.
That's absolute friend of the show.
A friend of ours that we hung out with.
Absolutely.
And gave her an award like a week ago.
Super cool person.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who is she?
Maine State Rep Diane Russell.
Diane Russell. Hello.
Hey, gentlemen. How are you?
Awesome. How you doing? Well, we got the applause back.
Tired.
Nice.
I don't know if you noticed that, Diane. We haven't had the applause going on our show lately, but it came back today.
It did.
For you.
By popular demand.
Yeah.
So you had a long day today, huh?
I had a long day yesterday. And then I went up to Orono today. But yes, it was a good day.
So right now, you have put forward another tax and regulate bill for marijuana legalization. And this isn't the first time. You've done this a couple times now. And this time you have more co-sponsors, more legislative support, 35 co-sponsors. And then you had the hearing yesterday, and it didn't quite maybe turn out the way you wanted to. Tell us what happened yesterday.
Well, I think the public hearing was actually pretty good. Generally speaking, there were things that I would have, liked to do differently. But all in all, I had a lot of supporters come out and make the case for why we need to end prohibition on marijuana, why it no longer made sense in today's society. But the interesting thing was the amount of opposition that came out. When I put in LD 1453 2 years ago, there were people that came in opposition, the head of MDEA and the head of the Office of Substance Abuse. I take it as a huge compliment. People came out in opposition because what that tells me is that our message is getting through and that people are listening and that it's time for a rational policy, and it's a rational policy debate, which we are right now in Maine. So on the one hand, it's always hard to hear someone take your baby, your bill, and hack it to pieces. But on the other hand, it tells me that the message is getting through to people, and over and over and over again, even when there is an article or in the paper where someone was quoted in opposition, or if there is an op-ed put in opposition, over and over again, the comment section just is like, this is old news. This is not good data. This is not where we need to be. So I think that the vast majority of people that are following this really support this bill. They support the principle of moving forward, the end of prohibition. There are some questions about, there were some drafting errors with the bill that were unfortunate and that I, worked for weeks to update. But it was interesting to see some folks that have been on the long, for years, supporting legalization efforts to come out in opposition to not just LD 1229, which is the bill that we're doing this year, but in opposition of legalizing generally. The caregivers, there's a couple of caregivers organizations in Maine, and one of them came out in strong opposition to not just the bill, but to legalizing it. And I thought that was a really interesting position to be in, frankly. I understand there had been some concerns with the way the bill had been drafted. There were some unfortunate errors, and I pretty much gone ahead and fixed all those concerns, but they came out in opposition, not just to the bill, but to the idea of legalizing it, saying that Maine's not ready and it's too big of a step. So that was interesting, and I think a lot of folks are realizing that that there are some interested parties. I know Massachusetts just is, and they just released their draft regulations for the medical marijuana. And the one thing that I would say is, be careful what entity you create, because down the line that the folks who are profiting on that industry are going to want to protect that when it comes time to fully legalize. And, in Maine, we're seeing that even though we have a really great, robust medical marijuana program, there are people that can't get into the system. I was in Bangor earlier in the week, and before the public hearing, and there were a lot of folks there for an event around, just informational session about medical marijuana programs, and there were so many folks there from all walks of life. It was, it was very much a room full of all Maine people that I would expect to see at a town hall, just your normal everyday people. And their biggest frustration, their biggest concern was, we can't get a recommendation because there's not enough physicians who are willing to write one. It's too expensive to get into it. And so even with the expanded version of the dispensaries and the robust medical marijuana program we have in Maine, we have patients that cannot get a recommendation to get access to medical marijuana. They can't afford it. It's too far away. Or what's also happening, I heard from a veteran recently who said PTSD, that's not an indication under our program right now. There's a bill in to fix that, but he gets that medical marijuana works for his PTSD. Unfortunately, he's not able to legally consume it for that purpose. So even under the existing program, there are so many people who really would like to see the medical benefits of it, but they can't get into that program. A straight-up legalization model, a straight-up tax and regulate model allows anyone to get into that, to not have to go through the process of getting a recommendation, which physicians are truly nervous to write, aside from a handful, and it would open the doors so that average everyday people could be able to have access to it. And at the end of the day, if you're over 21 and you're a responsible adult, why are we taking away your personal liberty to be able to consume something in the product of your own, in the privacy of your own home? I just don't believe that the government should be in the business of telling people what they can put in their own bodies. Someone made the point, if you really want to go after harmful products and addictive products, why are we not making sugar illegal? Let's talk about caffeine. And the reality is that that's not where we are, because we've decided that people should make a decision about that. And I think the same is true for marijuana as well. If you choose to use it for medical purposes, you should be able to do that. If you choose to use it for recreational purposes, why is my bourbon somehow more acceptable by society than someone else's marijuana? I just don't think that's a place where a judgment call that the government should be making. So,
can I jump in first? I just wanted to ask you: did any of your fellow legislators, like, did they actually get cold feet from that hearing? Like, did you lose any sponsors? You kind of get some a feeling of uneasiness from some of the folks?
That's a great question. Quite the opposite, actually. I had asked some co-sponsors if they would submit written testimony, which some did. But others came with their written testimony, and they insisted on delivering it. When I was telling people who had testified at the hearing on my behalf, he was stunned. Representative Bobby Beavers, she's a Democrat and always saying, I'm a moderate, I'm really a moderate, I'm a moderate. She's just and she said in the hearing, I'm a former Republican, and here I am as a Democratic legislator. I support this. Senator Linda Valentino from Saco delivered a fantastic speech talking about her work on the Veterans and Legal Affairs Committee, a committee I serve on, and her arguments for years that we should get ahead of casinos and the fact that we did not. She talked about the liquor contract that comes through our committee. We had Scott Heyman, who is a freshman Democrat in the Maine House, talk about his experience as a parent wanting to move this issue forward. He's a good progressive. Representative Terry Hayes, who is from Buckfield, in a very, very rural and very conservative town. She's a much more conservative Democrat. She came out to support this. We have the Republican National Committee woman come speak, not as a member of the Republican Party as herself, but she came and spoke out in support of it and got quoted extensively. I mean, there was just a wealth of people who came out in support, and I think lawmakers get that this issue is coming, and they get that they should get ahead of it. When you look at what happened in Colorado, the lawmakers didn't, the governor there didn't believe that this was going to happen, and then lawmakers had to work really quickly, retroactively, to get the regulations in place. And in Massachusetts, I was at a Suffolk Law School symposium last week, and they were talking about how quickly they had to put together regulations, because they didn't think that your referendum was going to pass, and it did.
And you hear what they're doing now, Diane, is we're basically at the end of the draft regulations. They've taken all the testimony. They're about to reveal the final regulations, Department of Public Health, and now a good amount of co-sponsors at the State House for a bill to totally change the rules on medical marijuana in Massachusetts. And these are the folks that wouldn't do anything before. Now they want to take control, complete control, and rewrite the whole initiative, which is crazy.
That happened in Maine. Actually, I think a lot of concern from the caregivers in Maine is a direct result. The same exact thing happened here. And in fact, no one knew that the bill that was being put before us after the initiative passed was bad. I actually voted for it because I figured no one told me these regulations were not in line with the intent or the spirit of the law. And it turned out once that bill passed that there were quite a few problems with it. Mandatory registries for patients was a big deal, and so
that's a big one.
You got to follow that, and you've got to track that, because it's not the intent, I don't think, of lawmakers to get it wrong. They just don't understand the way things work, the way folks on the ground do. So,
isn't that their job to understand, though?
What?
Isn't that the job of the legislators, to understand how their legislation is going to pan out on the ground?
Yeah, but it is, but it's hard to say with any when you're building a new program such as this, and it's still considered an illicit substance by the federal government, it's really hard to say how it's going to impact the business owners in your community sometimes until after the fact.
Absolutely.
There were also things in Maine, for example, we had an unlimited, the initiative did not limit the number of dispensaries that could open, but the state rulemaking did. They limited it to 8, and that created some controversy. I mean, there are lessons that continue to be learned as we set these things up, and it is incumbent upon the advocates, though, to educate lawmakers.
Absolutely.
Just because you become a lawmaker doesn't mean that you get this sudden, fire hose that goes into your ear and into your brain that gives you all the knowledge magically.
How can
that from advocates?
How can any legislator be expected to be an expert at all things? I don't know anyone like that in this world. And secondly, it's you don't have an unlimited resources of staff either. I'm sure in the state of Maine.
No, actually, I have in our state. My staff member services, I think, 12 other members of the legislature.
There you go. All right, this caregiver issue that has come up. What were some of the concerns? Like, what specifically were they worried about? And I know that you said you had submitted a revision to hopefully try to please them. What did that include? What was the issue with them?
So I think fundamentally, the way that the draft, I don't know what happened in the drafting office. We have a professional drafting office, and they worked really hard on this bill, so I don't want to come across as though I'm disparaging them, but I think they didn't understand the importance of both having the term dispensary and the term caregiver in any place, so there would be parity between the two. So there were places where the word dispensary was used, and I think they thought it was all-encompassing, and it's not. So what happened was that the caregiver term got left out, which meant that the caregivers left out. So it got left out entirely. So it made it look like a big business model, even though that's not at all what the bill was about. And it was certainly not. I mean, we advocated when I was talking to the revisor's office right up until the end. It was and caregiver. So I'm not quite sure what happened there, and that was a pretty unfortunate error. In addition, there were some, once something is published, it's easy for people to really digest the final product. So the ACLU of Maine came to me with some constructive changes on how to make the bill more reflective of the privacy concerns that people would have. Also, how to avoid federal preemption, meaning how to avoid ways that would land this bill in federal court when it becomes adjudicated, which invariably it will. So how do you use language that prevents that from happening and keeps it in a state court? And the difference between the two is that if it gets adjudicated in favor of federal statute at the federal level, then the entire system across the country goes under, is null and void. If it is adjudicated in a state court and it strikes down provisions, those provisions only get struck down in one state. So there's an important element there to consider. But I think I tried for weeks to sit down with the lobbyists from the Caregiver Association and was consistently told, oh, sure, we'll do it. And then that was not the case. And so by the time we were able to sit down, when I went through all the components of the bill, I said, okay, here are all the things that I'm going to change. What other things do you have that are of concern? And they said, oh, no, you've met them all. And then there's one element that dispensaries had wanted provisional licenses, and that was, of course, a deal breaker, except that in LD 1453, my original bill, I basically grandfathered both sides in. So all I did was to allow both the dispensaries and the caregivers into this new model, into the new market, under the same framework that they are market under the medical marijuana. Basically took what I had anticipated and trying to take all along, which was a position of neutral between the dispensaries and the caregivers. There's some fighting that goes on between the two of them.
Absolutely.
So I was like, I'm Switzerland. So I think I met all those, and we grandfathered both sides into the program the way that I'd originally intended. So I think I've met all those, but interestingly enough, those were not the concerns that were brought up at the committee hearing. The testimony that was submitted was all about Maine's just not ready, and this is too much, and it's going to be too confusing for law enforcement. So, I'm a little frustrated, frankly, to be honest, with the carrot. Like, every time I get close to the carrot, they yank it, and they're like, oh, no, we've got another issue. So I'm a little frustrated, and I'm not going to lie. But at the end of the day, the frustrating part for me is that there are caregivers across the state who could be affected if folks are not sitting at the table with the committee and advocating in a constructive manner. Then the people who are advocating in a constructive manner are going to get what they want. And so I'm hopeful to this. I remain hopeful that the folks that are lobbying for the caregivers are actually going to help and be more constructive, because to date, I don't think they've been doing a service to the caregivers. They've been ginning them up against this bill, unnecessarily knowing all along that there were changes coming and that there was never an intention.
Wow.
So I will say I've been negotiating in good faith, and I continue to do so.
Is there anyone that we should be contacting to ask them kind of some of these questions, like why aren't they meeting with you?
Well, they did finally meet. It's just
who's this
it was
group?
a little too late at that point.
Who's running this group? Who's lobbying for them? Do you have a name for us?
I'm not going to do that on the air. I don't think it's fair.
Probably look it up.
Yeah,
I just, the idea, there have been rumors circulating that I am in bed with big business and been wined and dined, and my brain has essentially been washed. That couldn't be further from the truth.
These people, you know what? They should call us, because this is insane. Diane,
I know.
I have a question before we jump off.
No.
Is there anything in the bill that protects Maine residents and business owners from the federal government, from like the DEA coming in if legalization happens? Like, is there anything in there?
See, that's the challenge, and that's the million-dollar question. if I put something in there, which I originally had, I had something about the Attorney General will be defending the bill. The challenge is that it creates language that gives any court the okay to put it in federal court. Any judge to say, you know, it should belong in federal court. And usually the folks who are bringing the case want it in federal court because then it upends the law, right? So you want to keep it in state court. So the challenge is, how do you get at what you're talking about without without drawing down without using language that does that? I think the more that we can keep this in state court and not federal court, the better that we can protect the very people you're talking about. But there is no guarantee. There's absolutely no guarantee. There's no guarantee under the medical. There's no guarantee under a recreational model that the federal government and the DEA won't come in. In fact, we're seeing it in certain places across the country that they are already, even under medical marijuana law statutes. So, you know, until the federal government stops on this seesaw and makes a decision that is rational, I think, and reflective of what is happening in the states, that threat is always going to be there. But conversely, we have a Congress that can barely rename bridges right now. They're completely ineffective. They're hovering between a 9 and 13% approval rating. And the expectation that we should leave it up to the feds is ass backwards right now, quite frankly. And it's going to be coming from the states, and the states have to lead on this.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of that, do you think, number one, that this will pass, and how close are you? And secondly, who's going to pass it first? Because this is my next column in Dig Boston. I think you know, I quoted you for this next one that's coming out this week. And the question is Massachusetts or Maine going to be the first state to legalize it in the New England Northeast?
Yeah, well, I think it's a fair question. And again, another $1 million question. There are a lot of those. You know, I don't like to jinx myself. And so I remain cautiously optimistic. I know that we have a few votes on the committee already. We have more if it's done constructed in a particular fashion. We are getting closer and closer, and I think we're a lot closer than people realize. But there's a lot of folks on that committee that are really on the fence. I mean, if you are in Maine and you want to see Maine be the first state to do this, you've got to email the Criminal Justice Committee between now and next Thursday. Next Friday is the work session. And even if you disagree with some of the components of or what heard from LD 1229, the idea is that the committee needs to hear that you support legalization and a tax and regulate structure, and let them work through the details to make the bill the best version possible. There's a lot up in the air, Mike, and I got to tell you, we're really close, but this is a horse race that I am just not going to bet on.
Yeah, I hear you on that. That's a good answer.
Jumping back to the whole thing about protecting ourselves from the Fed, like, if it did go to federal court, like, on what grounds is the federal government going to say that you're violating federal law? Because, I mean, you're not violating the Interstate Commerce Clause, right? So, like, how are you actually doing anything illegal because you have a 9th and 10th Amendment right?
Well, you know, every right comes with caveats that are that have case law. So when we look at the Constitution, we see the straight-up language. When the courts look at the Constitution, they look at readings and case law, right, to context for how far those rights go and what responsibilities come with those rights. So it's not as cut and dry as I think some of us would like. And the question is you're right about the Interstate Commerce Clause, and within my amended version, it certainly makes it clear that the only people that you can purchase from are licensed Maine business owners. But it's the Schedule 1. So far, the courts have determined that the federal government has the right to determine what drugs it can schedule as under Schedule 1, and until the courts change their mind on that, or until the federal government does, there's always going to be this implicit threat. And then you lay over that, Frank, the fact that in most cases, that from what I understand, the federal government the United States government has led the charge on this, but we have multiple treaties. We have countless treaties around drug enforcement and drug prohibition and drug prohibition laws. And the irony here is that in many cases we were the ones advocating for it.
Yeah.
Nobody else really cared, or not that many.
We twisted their
cared.
arms.
But now we're stuck with them, and now the same people that want to continue this prohibition model, like, oh, wait, we've got all these treaties. Well, we have these treaties because the U.S. wanted it. Maybe the U.S. should reconsider its position.
Well, we can rescind treaties at any time.
Absolutely.
The Senate can do that, can't they?
Oh, yes. But will they? But will they? You know, and that's the thing, like when these federal laws, like for marijuana, it's usually, from my understanding, once you hit 100 plants or over 50 pounds, that's when the feds can charge you.
That's right. I mean, it becomes a much bigger charge at that point, and chances are you are not going to be charged in state court where we're much more decriminalized. Chances are you're going to be prosecuted in federal court, and that comes with its own host of problems.
Yep. And you also have the tax issues, which the IRS doesn't really... They haven't been helping medical marijuana businesses at all, not even the nonprofits. They've been really screwing them. And then you also have, like, the federal government can also do racketeering.